And at this time, we're going to run right into our next talk. And I have to tell you, I'm a little excited about this talk. It is about markings for cattle, but it is a different take because we also have this identification system in the United States, but it's different in Australia. So I'm really looking forward to, whoa, sorry, that was a little loud. At this time, I'd like to introduce Clint Harvey, Dzintra Menesis, and Melissa Silk, and have them come to the stage. Thank you.
Okay, now this is going to be fun because I'm this height and she's that height, and we have one mic. So we'll do our best.
And Clint's opted out.
Yeah. Clint Harvey is just over there. We will throw to him later. Hi everyone, my name is Melissa Silk and I'm the head of design at JMC Academy, which is just up the road from here, the Brisbane campus anyway. I'm based in Sydney and I oversee the design department for Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne. This is Dzintra Menesis, and Dzintra is a burgeoning designer, a researcher, and also works for Angus Australia, which is a cattle breed society. So we're going to tell you a story today. We're really excited to tell you a story, and it's all about cows.
Thank you. So there was some. Oh God. There was some keen interest in our title, Bovine Pyroglyphics, where pyro denotes fire and glyph signifies a symbol conveying visual information. With the addition of bovine, we're discussing branding used to mark the ownership of livestock. Livestock branding has a long history in Australia. We've got we're doing a thing? We're doing a thing. Awesome. Thank you. I'll go again. Livestock branding has a long history in Australia, dating back to the early days of European settlement as a means of identifying livestock ownership, deterring theft, and facilitating the management of large herds across vast territories. This is you.
Yes. But what we want to do first is just imagine a time before the invasion, the colonial invasion, and pause to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the entire land. We recognise their ongoing custodianship and connection to lands, waters and communities. We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past, present and emerging.
Our topic of research is centred around the 1812 requirement of immediate branding with a particular and distinctive mark, which marks a time less than 30 years after colonisation. We thought such directives were not issued until 1872, with the development of the Queensland Brand Designs font used in the Queensland Brand Act of that year. We assumed that 1872 signified the start of cattle branding in Australia, but we were wrong. The Queensland Brand Act of 1872 is actually an updated regulation from 1866, and cattle wandering rather than full-blown cattle rustling was an issue right from the start. Today we focus on the Queensland Brand Designs font with full knowledge that this typographic system could not prevent cattle rustling, but served as a tool to enforce the government-mandated livestock branding laws in colonial Australia. This is you.
The problem, cattle rustling. In the 1870s, Australia experienced one of its most significant incidents of cattle theft. On February 11, 1873, in Roma, Queensland, before His Honour Judge Blackany, the case of Regina versus Redfern came to light. Redfern stood accused of unlawfully taking 100 bullocks, 100 cows, 100 heifers, 100 steers, and an esteemed imported white bull from Bowen Downs Station. Despite the seemingly modest figures reported, the actual tally estimated 1,000 cattle stolen by Henry and his group of accomplices, which they subsequently sold for £5,000. In Australia today, the equivalent amount would be 1.4, etc., million dollars, which is a pretty big heist.
This was you still.
So this event served as the inspiration for Rolf Boldreud's novel Robbery Under Arms, which is quite well known in this country, vividly depicting the exploits of outlaws and criminals known as bushrangers in Australia. Notably, the character, Captain Starlight, in the novel is directly modelled after Henry Redfern. It's a great story.
The solution, the Australian Brands Act and its typographic system. The resolution to the persistent issue of livestock theft emerged with the introduction of the Registration of Brands Act in 1866, a legislation introduced by Minister for Lands John Bowie Wilson. The New South Wales Registration of Brands Act mandated the Register General of New South Wales to publish quarterly reports listing registered brands. This included a direction for reference document at the beginning of the cattle and horse registers to clarify the distinction between divisions. The registered brands were sorted into 6 distinct categories, including letters, letters with numerals, conjoined letters, signs and characters with letters, signs and characters without letters, and numerals. Within the 1866 Brands Act, additional specifications were outlined regarding the arrangement of letter forms, numerals, and symbols for the creation of a brand mark. For example, under the division for letters in the 1866 Registration of Brands Act instructed the following. Where a brand is formed by placing one letter over another or 2 or more letters, the upper letter, in whatever position it may be, is in all cases, whether the letters be ordinary or conjoined, held to be the index letter and entered accordingly in the division to which it belongs. See me if you have any further questions. Here we have a lazy B placed on top of an R. Lazy in branding language refers to a letter rotated horizontally. This brand was officially registered for horses by Robert Berry of Coonamble in 1869. Prior to 1872, it's unclear whether the letter forms used for the brand mark within the register match the brand marks actually used on the livestock. If someone else had been using this brand mark recorded in the brand's register, even for many years, they had to stop immediately or face a fine of £50, which is equivalent to $10,000 Australian money today. In his 2014 book, Survey of Australian Type Specimens, Dennis Bryans makes reference to an update of the Brands Act by the Queensland Government on the 4th of May in 1872, which was then put into effect on the 1st of July. Brian's research confirms our knowledge of this typographic system being adopted by the Davies Type Foundry in 1873. Brian's can be credited as bringing this font to light, which enabled our investigation into cattle brands. Here, Queensland Brand Design's font is presented in a broadside called the New South Wales Special Horse and Cattle Brands by lithography music printer Johann Alexander. These brands were cut and dies executed by John Davies for Her Majesty's Government of New South Wales under the direction of Mr. Thomas Richards, who was the government printer in 1873.
Enter the Davies brothers. John Davies was born in 1819. His early career saw him as a punch cutter to the Fan Street foundry of Reed and Fox, and also to Vincent and James Figgins in London before migrating to Australia. The Davies Brothers Type Foundry quickly became renowned for its superior quality, supplying lead type to the New South Wales government printer as early as 1858. The foundry worked under the direction of William Hanson, who notably became the first Australian official to commission a specific typographic design for a particular purpose. The Davies Foundry specimen card, mentioned in the Sydney Morning Herald on July 13, 1869, showcased different fonts, including a new pica, a long primer Clarendon on a pica body, and a pica erased for bill purposes as per Hanson's instruction. This card demonstrates the capabilities of the Davies foundries during that time. Establishing this body of work afforded Davies the commission for the production of lead type matching the branding irons in the Government Gazette. This was a portfolio of works for the Davies Type Foundry. Davies created the Queensland Brands design font, which allowed the foundry to expand its work to other colonies, similar to what happened in South Australia. According to Bryans, using different combinations of letters and numbers helped colonies monitor animals crossing borders. These letterforms were used for both page and forge. This font was cast in the lead to be printed in the brand journals as a record of the registered brands of livestock. It was also forged by the blacksmiths as an identifying mark on the beasts. Our view is that the dual purpose gave the typeface its unique appearance.
Typography versus marking. The Davies Brothers brand designs presented an Australian typographic system tailored for both printing at body text sizing in letterpress by government printers and for use by country blacksmiths in crafting branding irons. The new system provided a streamlined method of registration for livestock owners, as both beast and record of beast used the same typographic solution. This differed from age-old methods of livestock branding that relied on a system of symbols and pictograms, as well as publishing a legible register for administration purposes.
Enter a perfect circle. The Queensland Brands Act of 1872 had distinct categories of brands, each comprising 2 letters and 1 numeral, with variations such as horizontal placement, aka lazy or script. These brands encompass symbols like the broad arrow and crown used for government-owned livestock, such as those of the Queensland Police and Queensland Border Customs. However, these unique characters served as typographic peculiarities, as governments mandated letters that were distinguishable regardless of their orientation, such as avoiding confusion between O and 0 or 6 and 9. Look at the O and the variation. 0.
The mechanics. There are many unknowns about the early implementation of this typographic system. Methods used for branding animals before the 1872 release of the Queensland brand designs remains elusive. We know the Davies brothers made the type required for enacting the legislation. We know that this typographic system had 2 components. One is print and the other is on the hide of a beast. We do not know why there are so many branding irons that do not adhere to the typographic system, such as these ones acquired from an antique store out of rural New South Wales. We do know that the Davies Brothers brands font reflects their practical interpretation of this typographic system outlined in the 1866 Brands Act. We do know that the Davies brand designs font was created primarily for brand marks for livestock and along with a font of lead type for record-keeping purposes. There are still some questions that we don't have answers to. I might get these a bit smaller. Thank you, perfect. So, number 1. Notice that there is no I in Queensland brand designs font, but there is in New South Wales reversible caps for brands font. What failed in New South Wales brand designs for this evolution to occur? We assumed that there were multiple iterations of the typographic system across different colonies. We are assuming that the original reversible caps for brands New South Wales was purely utilised for documentation purposes and did not require the branding irons on the livestock to match exactly. Many questions. Now we go into Brisbane Brand Designs Experiment 2024, a collaboration between Clint, Harvey and Troy Linster. In our research project, we collaborated with the international type designer Troy Linster to delve into the typographic intricacies of the original 1872 Queensland brand designs type system. Through our collaboration, we explored the unique typographic features inherent within the system, which we're eager to share with you. Linster used his existing font Brisbane as a base to experiment with visual optics for optimizing the rotation of letterforms as required within the livestock branding system. In this Brisbane Brands font experiment, Linster adjusted both the horizontal and vertical stroke weights for each letter. Contrasting this with the original Queensland brand designs font by the Davies brothers, we can see that they did not incorporate rotating adjustments. Instead, they created a single set of letters or symbols intended for rotation. The rotated glyphs in Troy's Brisbane brand font have been adjusted to consider letter proportion and horizontal and vertical stroke thickness to obtain optical balance with their vertical companions. This results in two distinct sorts per letter, vertical and horizontal. On Tuesday this week, within the Branding Irons and Blockchains workshop, we had the opportunity to print with these wood type prototypes made by Clint Harvey at the State Library of Queensland's Makerspace. We encourage you to visit the spam container on Friday evening to meet with with Clint, Troy, Melissa and myself and discuss how the research project influenced this practical wood type experiment. If you're interested in seeing some of the findings from the Branding Irons and Blockchains workshop, please come and visit the spam container at QUT Kelvin Grove this Friday evening, and we will be there to discuss the project.
And just before we move on, this beautiful print was made on Tuesday by Matt, who is a student in this room. There he is. A round of applause for Matt. Just by experimenting with not only the blocks, the type, but also with some techniques that Clint very, very generously shared with us. It was just a great day, and I highly recommend visiting SPAM while you're here. Now, the Menesis, 4 generations of blacksmiths. Our research project delved into a font originally designed by the Davies brothers, as you know, in 1872 for Australian livestock branding. Throughout the investigation, we uncovered a typographic system delivered via the Brands Act. This font, introduced in 1872, underwent a natural evolution and continued to grow and expand over time. We initially assumed that there were limited contemporary typographic standards for livestock branding until we found the Menesis, who are a family of blacksmiths from the Darling Downs town of Jandaway, north of Dalby in Queensland. They are still working with the Davies Brands font today. Even though the Brands Act was revised in 1915, the use of the Queensland Brand Designs font currently remains a legal requirement. Where we assumed that there was a declining typographic standard in livestock branding today, we are pleased to announce that the hard work of the Davies brothers has stood the test of time. Sean Morrissey, a 4th-generation blacksmith, explained to us that the additional series and expansion of available letterforms were due to the volume of brands being registered, and there needed to be more variations. Owners were able to substitute symbols only after they had registered their 3-piece typographic brand according to the requirements of the 1915 Brands Act. Also, Sean Morrissey enlightened us to the fact that the Davies Brands font was digitised in 1996 as a true type font. Our exploration emphasises the role of context in visual messaging and function over aesthetics, which reflects the dynamic nature of typography and its adaptation to changing needs and contexts. Looking ahead, there is potential for further research into visual communication and the playful exploration of typographic rules and conventions. In summary, the research illuminates the fascinating journey of a typeface designed in 1872 with a discrete purpose in mind, which continues to serve as a vital typographic system for recording livestock ownership in the present day. We have a little film that we're going to be showing you now while there are questions. It doesn't have any audio, but if you have any questions for us, you can watch and ask at the same time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, any questions from the audience? All right.
I'm curious what some of the visual trends are in the construction of the letter forms. Like in the last or second to last slide you showed, there was that kind of italicized script, and it seemed like that had more similarities to neon lettering, where you try to keep a continuous line. I would imagine that approach would be easier when you're molding that metal, but some details in the Davies type seems like it really doesn't care about trying to be continuous. It's intentionally requiring multiple pieces. So I'm curious if you noticed any trends that seem to govern the structure of the letter forms.
It's a really good question. It's a very good question. Look, can I were you able to run up here? So Clint and I have been working together on this with Melissa and Troy, and he and myself were in contact with Sean Morrissey, who has been working with the branding irons still to this present day. And over the phone, I recall a conversation where he said that the contrary to what you're saying, that the curly ones that you're saying that help, please.
No, it's a great observation. You probably saw there were multiple series, so they produced the cursive set of characters as well, and they're actually released at a similar time to the brands font we looked at. And Morrissey was talking to us about the cursive letterforms. As you would think, you could probably bend them and forge them a little more, and yet his words to us were if somebody requested the cursive, they would try and push them towards the other form. So there was obviously something there from a making perspective that made that task a little bit more difficult.
I would say it's materials that are predicting the forms, it's the quality and the properties of forging that would have made it really the evolution of the actual visual form. Yeah.
I'm curious if in your research into the making of the brands, if newer technologies like 3D printing have been things that people are experimenting with.
Yes, you're probably right. I mean, there are other things that are being experimented with too, such as, so you're probably right in that, 3D printing can sort of, do everything that everything else can do now, but it would be the application of this font. If you could 3D print in metal that can be heated up and burnt into the side of an animal, then yes. But ethically, we need to say that ethically we don't agree with branding animals.
No, look, it's from a livestock branding perspective in modern times, just from what I do for work, it's really relative from state to state. 3D printing certainly could be for more of an art perspective thing maybe, but it's more of in modern times we're looking at nils tags, we're looking at doing things which is like an ear tag. We're looking at doing things that are like QR code. Like it's different. This is more a discussion today about something pretty niche, which is this particular font within this time. But yeah, that's what we got at this stage. Yeah. Go for it, Wayne. Knew you were going to ask something.
I was just curious about the capital X in particular. This may be more
Us
of a question
too,
for
mate.
Clint, but yeah, it was the only character I could see that was stenciled that had a break within the character. And I was looking at it thinking, is there some mechanical reason in metal manufacturing, but I couldn't see one. I was just wondering if you had any perspective on that as to why you think it was done that way.
I think someone else can answer that question.
So far, much of the conversation is centered around the making of the brands themselves, but I'd also like people to consider what happens when you press those brands into flesh. And if you've got an X, you're going to tear the flesh. The flesh is going to peel open. And I'm also wondering, or perhaps, I'm not that familiar with burning flesh, but I'm also wondering about the cursive and whether that would have an impact on the flesh peeling away from the skin. So. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
I think you've got a point, and if you look at, maybe we could just go back to the last slide and this one. If you're imagining that any of these shapes are being pressed into your flesh with a hot iron, there are going to be, let's just imagine that for a moment, that there are going to be areas where there's convergence of the iron, and certainly the X is an anomaly. We don't know why. We'll have to. That's one of the unanswered questions. However, I would say that the Q also has a convergence area, and also possibly the dip in the M. I think probably the Q, in my opinion, is presenting with a few question marks in terms of how that would burn the flesh. It's just interesting as a discussion.
We're going to trial that on Friday evening.
Yeah. I believe Wayne, you put your hand up for that, didn't you? Yes. And someone over here wants to be burnt as well. No, he has a question. Here you go.
All right, we have time for one more question. David, up there.
Thank you for the questions, guys. This is much appreciated.
Well, you note that the branding font is single stroke design, and I think that my hypothesis is that from a blacksmithing standpoint, it's a lot easier to bend a single line than it is to make intersections. And,
I would agree.
So they were probably doing, I'm guessing they were doing that for the convenience of the blacksmith.
I agree with you, and I think that also introducing a join that has to be welded is introducing an area of compromise in the material. So the X, that's probably contributing to why the X is separated, the strokes of the X. Interestingly, the Q is not a single line, so it's pretty much the only one, I think. And the number 4, yeah. So it'd be really interesting to do an inventory now of which sequences are coded with a Q or a 4 or an X. That's your next job.
Okay. Unless there isn't anything else, we do hope to see you all on Friday evening over at QUT Kelvin Grove, where there's going to be a continuation of this, discussions and a little bit of fun at the spam shipping container. Thank you very much.
And you might even get to do something like Matt did, which was just beautiful. Thank you, everyone.